Thank you all and good evening. This is Mayor Mary Ann Kloss, and this is the City of Clyde Hill Council study session for Tuesday, April the 5th, 2022. I'm calling us to order. Courtney, how are we doing with the roll call?
All council members are present.
Wonderful. And it looks like because we have a nice study session, we will start it off with the right foot and ask you to stand and make a pledge of allegiance from wherever you might be. So,
that's not on the agenda.
it is number 1 up there. See where it says call to order, roll call, and pledge of allegiance?
Oh, you're right.
Is that right? All right. It'll still put us in a good mood. Here we go. I pledge allegiance to the
United
States of America.
States of America.
For
The
which
republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under
God,
God, indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all.
There you go. We did pretty good, guys. Good job. All right. So we are all here and accounted for. We are still operating under revised rules of order because of the continued pandemic. So hoping we're getting out of this pretty soon, but appreciate everyone's continued patience and diligence. As we were chatting just briefly beforehand, we still have COVID in the community, so we're playing it safe and continue to do so. So thank you. On section number 2 for the approval of the agenda, this is a consideration of a motion to approve the agenda. This is your chance to make amendments. And just a reminder, this is a accumulation of the different topics that we've had over the past couple of councils and recommendations on here. So you can tell we have a packed agenda, certainly open if you wanted to move some of those around. And we also have a fairly light, quote unquote, agenda for next council meeting on April 12th. So if you still felt like you wanted to make adjustments and move it over there, we can certainly entertain that. So anyways, with that preamble, motion for 2.1, please. Thank you.
I think there are actually some hands raised to make changes.
See
I think
it's right now. Sorry, I had this turned.
Sure.
I have down Dean H as first.
Hey, I've got a question about 3.3. Which council member asked for this item on the agenda for the study session?
This was we brought it up briefly, if I remember, last month at the agenda at the council meeting, and believed it was appropriate because of the timeliness. We have a timing issue that we have to take advantage of.
Okay, so no one from the council brought this up. And okay, I'm gonna ask that we move that into the thing next week so we have more time to focus on the items we have ahead of us.
You're amending to move that to the April 12th meeting. Okay. Any other amendments to that? Scott, your hands.
yeah, I second Dean's proposal.
Okay.
Motion. And then I actually want to add a brief item to the agenda, which is a discussion of chapter 2 of our city code. And I don't want to, I basically just want to go over some thoughts. I've been thinking about this quite a bit, having read this and reflected on some of the issues the city's facing. And so given that this is a study session, I don't intend to bring up a motion during this discussion, but I'd like to add a discussion of section 2 of the city code to the agenda.
I'll second that.
All right. We have 2 amendments here to the agenda. Anything else from the other council members? And they've both been seconded. We'll do a collective.
I'm sorry, just for the sake of focus, I'm going to ask to move the stormwater to the very end, and I'm happy for Scott's discussion to go before the rules and procedures, just for the sake of managing energy and attention.
All righty. All right, we'll do that. And you wanted that 3.4 moved after the your rules and procedures thing?
Yes, please.
Okay. And Scott's before that. Okay, got it. All right, you guys all on board with that? What else do you have for changes so we can get it flowing? We have
Yeah, I have one,
good.
at the risk of two quick questions related to what's been discussed already. At the risk of being ignorant, chapter 2 is what's it reference? So I don't have to look it
Administration
up.
and personnel.
Administration and personnel?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Second is before we move the celebration, if there is an issue in timing, should we wish, as we proceed with the celebration by waiting a week, then I want to make sure we don't hurt
Fair.
that process. If not, I'm okay. So I guess I'm looking for staff to say it's going to make it harder for us to do this if we wait a week.
To Steve's question, just so you know, if you want to make adjustment, Courtney, is that going to be a problem? Waiting on,
If we wait till next week to discuss it, it's not going to cause an
be
issue.
okay with timing? Okay,
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Okay.
that answers your question, Steve.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so we have some adjustments in the order and moving a few things over onto the next week's agenda. Those were the amendments to it. They were there, motioned and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Well, I should have said any further discussion. I'm sure you would have spoke up. Okay, so we have our agenda. Let us go ahead then and move forward. The first one up is the 3.1, and that is speaking to the attorney memo. And we do have our guest here, which is Tom Brubaker, whom on the council, Councilmember Moore and Jones were the key participants in the city attorney selection committee. And Tom Brubaker would be our assigned city attorney. And he's graciously come just for a few moments tonight to say hello and to be available to you and the rest of the council so that you might feel comfortable either asking any latent questions you may have. The hope is that we would make sure we clarified any concerns before we go next week into the agenda seeking for approval to sign the contract. So if you wish to say hi or ask anything further of Tom Brubaker, he is here. Answer questions directly. Want to make sure that you're comfortable with this firm and Tom as being our appointed individual. What questions or concerns do you have here? Thank you, Dean.
I want to say there's a very impressive history on the web and a lot of effusive praise from the city of Kent, which was just delightful to read. I had one straightforward question, and it involves city involvement in private disputes and how you think about it, how you approach it. If there are illustrative examples from your time advising other cities that you think would be helpful for us to see.
Excuse me. If you mean when a citizen has an issue like you, I know you have some code enforcement issues on your agenda to discuss tonight. Are those the kind of private issues you're discussing or asking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because sometimes go ahead. Yes.
Well, these are always tough problems. First of all, they're the voters. They're the people that reside and own property in the city. Usually their issues are important. I like to make sure they feel heard. And I try to speak in a straightforward language so that it doesn't sound like legalese. I try to answer their concerns. I try to address a solution that works for both the city and for the private person. And sometimes I have to respectfully disagree or, say that there are things the city can do and the city can't do, and explain it as well as I can. And deal with it as well as I can at that point.
Thank you.
I try to respect, everybody, both the citizens and the staff and the elected officials.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure if Bruce or Scott wish to add any extra comment related to this. You guys played a pivotal role, and you obviously participated more thoroughly with the interview process. Is there anything you guys wish to say?
Well, this is Bruce. I would say we had a great interview with Tom, and we're impressed with his experience and his time with the city of Kent. And we went through a significant number of questions with him. He had good responses to them. He was articulate, and certainly I was impressed with him. And I think Scott may have some comments as well.
Yeah, I'll just briefly say, Tom, welcome. Thanks for attending tonight. Wasn't expecting to see you this soon, but glad to see you. And yeah, definitely enjoyed the interview process. I appreciate the council and the mayor, giving me a chance to participate in it since I couldn't in the initial round. But one of the things that I liked about Tom is that, as Dean said, he was at the city of Kent for about 14 years as a city attorney. So deep experience, not just as an outside counsel, but as a in-house city attorney, which I kind of like that. And then he's semi-retired in the way he described it to us. Sorry to say this right in front of you, Tom, but was that he doesn't want to be working full time, but he's got plenty of bandwidth. And I think that, one of the things we were exploring with some of the other firms was who was going to be on point and did they really have the time to do it and those sorts of things. And so there's no concern at all about that from his perspective. And I got real comfortable with that too. So I think along with Bruce, feel real good about this potential selection. I do have one request. I noticed in the memo here that Attorney DiGiulio has signed off on the prospective contract. Could you please send the contract around to the council members as soon as possible? Don't wait until Friday. Please send it like tonight or tomorrow morning so that we can all take a look at it, because I do a lot of contracts for a living and I have specific input that I want to have into that contract. So I'd like to have a chance to review it prior to next Tuesday.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Mhm.
Anybody else comment or questions or requests, just to make sure we're all paving the right path?
I'd be happy to answer any questions or give you guys some of my background, or if you have any questions or concerns at all, I'm very happy to answer them.
So, yeah, I thoroughly appreciate, the consensus of the committee, and that's the most important piece to me. But Tom, and welcome to the meeting tonight. My question I was kind of pondering is, give me a little more of your background besides the joy you get from being semi-retired, which means you're not retired at all. I can speak from that, and a little bit about the rest of your background, if you would.
Sure. So as they mentioned, I worked in Kent as an assistant city attorney and a city attorney for 27 years. The last 15, I think, I was the city attorney. During that time, I also spent 15 months as the interim or acting chief administrative officer when we had an absence. So I spent a lot of time, wearing a couple of hats and really becoming familiar with the business of a municipal corporation, which is what Kent is and what Clyde Hill is. During that time, Kent grew from about 38,000 to 125,000 people. So I worked on a lot of issues. I also taught municipal law at the Seattle University School of Law for about 10 years. And I've been involved with the Washington State Association of Municipal Attorneys. I've presented in front of that group a number of times. I am a past president of that group, and I was awarded the Ernest Campbell Award for Excellence in the Practice of Municipal Law. I can't remember the whole name of it, but it's a rare award. Steve's got it too. Steve's been given it too, and he deserved it. But It's an honor to get it as a municipal attorney. So that's kind of my biography background. I retired from Kent in 2018 and started working with Lighthouse. I work on and off with other clients. I work regularly with Valley Communications Center. That's a 911 center for South King County. I've done work for Mercer Island, City of Mercer Island, Mukilteo, Liberty Lake called me from way over by Spokane, and Milton, and as well as Edmonds and Maple Valley, which are regular clients of Lighthouse Law Group. Let's see, what else can I tell you? AWC, I also work for AWC sometimes for their, not really for their, for their insurance branch. And they have asked me to present to them a class for elected officials by video conference called Government 201, which is basically about an hour and a half long presentation on the roles and responsibilities between mayors and council members. That's a quick background. I feel very comfortable handling, the issues that cities face. I'm happy to advise elected officials. I'm very used to being in council meetings. I don't know, I probably attended close to 1,000 in those years. Separation of powers, public-private partnerships, anything having to do with procurement or contracting. I read for Mukilteo recently, I advised their Civil Service Commission, so I wouldn't want to step on Steve DiGiulio's expertise, but I've dipped my toe into that. I've also written and presented on technology contracts, and I'm pretty well advised on use of right-of-way, franchises, property rights involving right-of-way.
Okay. Did you and the committee talk about backup for you when you can't make it or you're unavailable, any of those? Has that been discussed as well?
Yes, Jeff Teraday would be my backup. He can't be here tonight, but he wanted to be here. Wanted to apologize for not being to make it. Also on our firm, if Jeff and I are both unavailable, either Sharon Cates, who could step in, or Patricia Teraday.
Okay, and the committee went through all that as well?
Yes.
And was satisfied with that part?
Yes, and Steve, Jeff Teraday is the city attorney for the city of Edmonds as well.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, and Patricia is the city attorney for Maple Valley.
Oh, hitting them all. Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us, and nice background. Congratulations.
Well, I'm thrilled. I realize, I understand I don't have the position yet, but I really look forward to it. And in my semi-retirement, it's a wonderful way for me to keep active, keep busy, keep engaged, and stay up to date with legal issues involving municipalities. So I think it would be a very good fit.
Great.
Great. Well, we do appreciate your time and willingness to pop in and at least have the audience with the rest of the council members in case there was any last minute issues or concerns. So if there's nothing further from the council and you feel like you have your information, then we will give you the contracts as requested, and we'll look forward to the final motion at next week's council meeting. All right, going once, twice, and sold. Tom, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to speak
Talk to
to
you
all
later.
of you.
Thanks to the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now move along on to item number 3.2. This is the discussion of the fire station number 5, replacement, property swap, facilities master plan, all sorts of important stuff. We wanted to toss a few items your way to get you thinking. Some decisions eventually need to be made, and it's hard to spring this and make a decision on the spot. So hopefully the memo was helpful, and I'll turn it over to Dean.
Good evening, everybody. So thanks for humoring us, for letting us add this into this meeting. This does have a large element of timeliness to it. As most of you know, we have a letter of intent with Bellevue Fire to swap the properties and lease back half of our property to enable Bellevue Fire to build a new modern fire station directly to the east where the rental house sits now. The letter of intent has a number of other items related to stormwater upgrades and different things related to surveys and things like that. What we've been doing right now is we've been meeting monthly with them, sometimes more than monthly, and both internally and with them. And we don't normally have large projects like this that aren't related to residential development or redevelopment. And so some years back, the development agreement process was put into code, Title 1.15, and it was designed for non-residential type projects, such as specifically Bellevue Christian School when they were looking to do a big remodel. A development agreement sets forth the development standards and other provisions that apply to and govern and vest the development, use, and mitigation of the development of the real property for the duration specified in the agreement. That's right out of our code. This is a legacy project for everybody involved, for Bellevue, for Clyde Hill, for the entire Points community. And we think that it is important to maintain a level of control similar to what we've done with the letter of intent. Actually, much more involved than that, but staff feels the use of the development agreement process would be a preferable resource for this project for a number of reasons. It puts the planning commission, the city council, and public hearings in the driver's seat rather than being at the whim of the hearing examiner when it comes to variances. This project, I like to quote Greenwood's words on this project. It's putting 10 pounds of tomato. God, I messed up. Of potatoes into a 5-pound sack. Sorry, John. There's usable land space is limited, and up to this point, Bellevue has already requested about 20 variances for this project. And if we were to go through our standard process, that would take a lot of those decisions out of our hands. By our hands, especially the planning commission and city council. So we're recommending that that we go forward with a development agreement with this. We have broached this subject to Bellevue Fire. They were a little hesitant at first because I think most of their work is internal within the city of Bellevue, and they're not weren't used to working outside the city. But then they came back to us and said they like the idea, and we're thinking of potentially 2 agreements still, one for the property and one for the actual development. So I wanted to throw this out to everybody so we can discuss it and make sure that our assumptions or presumptions of the desire to maintain as much local control of this permitting process as possible is kept in-house. I'm looking to open this up for discussion or questions, or frankly, simply just a head nod from council to say that that you approve of moving forward in this direction.
All right.
Yeah.
What questions? Thank you, Steve.
Well, I appreciate the desire to make this a more efficient process, and I get it. But can you give me a little bit about what the development agreement with that how that changes the process besides the planning commission? I'm sorry, hearing examiners and such. How does this move it along more efficiently? Just so I get caught up in that issue.
Okay. I know that there are, like I said, there are right at this point there are about 20 variances that have been brought to the city. Probably I'm going to defer to either Rich or Sean to kind of help me out on that particular question. One of you two want to take that?
Yeah, Rich, unless you have I can speak to that a little bit. So,
Yeah, go ahead, John.
all right, very good. So yeah, the Councilmember Friedman, some of the advantages with like a DA is just as sorry, as Dean mentioned, was that you get a little bit more local control. So this project, the fire station could step through our typical process, and they could apply for permits. They could follow all the different Clyde Hill Municipal Code rules for development, and then they could also go and seek those variances from the hearing examiner. A hearing exam for an antenna, water, hose drying tower, other appurtenances on the building, pretty minor things. And a hearing examiner could say, well, no, we don't think that you need that particular one. So of this list of variances, many of them minor items, any one of them could be a potential failure point. There's also other interests as far as what happens with the site when we're done, how we negotiate some of that, how we, again, how you control some of the flow of the work and the flow of the design, and then some input that the city might want to have. Again, those are things that aren't really at your disposal in the typical process because it's all laid out very specifically in Clyde Hill Municipal Code. But with the DA, it gives you a little bit more opportunity to have some back and forth discussion with the applicant, and again, find those little things. Like some of what we want to talk about with the little piece of property that comes in. What is Bellevue's role in providing us what we're looking for with that as part of what would be a DA.
Well,
I hope that
so first of all, who ultimately then is making the decisions on these, what I would say, these variances? Who's the decision maker, and how do we do that? And the second is, I'm not really bothered by the little things. It's how do we know there isn't a big thing we're making decisions on?
Yeah, and that's again, I think that's one of the advantages with the DA is it's all in one, right? And so the whole agreement passes or fails. The general process for it is a public hearing, a planning commission review, and hopefully recommendation, but then ultimately approval by the city council. So the city council is the deciding authority as to whether all those variances pass or fail, or whether they agree in principle with the project at all.
Okay.
So
that's helpful. We get the right information, and then we can make sure we make good decisions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Scott.
Sorry, I'm looking at the diagram, and I'm kind of confused. I see the Bellevue Fire Station. I don't see City Hall on this diagram. Where is it?
So it's a very busy diagram. So City Hall would be on the bottom of the picture, and I could share a screen and we could show a different image if you want. It's actually the same image but oriented correctly. The bottom of the screen would be City Hall. So further, off page, off picture would be where City Hall is, but more or less the border is where the police department wall is.
So the green section is the half of the parcel that we would retain at the bottom of the picture, and then the white same size lateral bar above that is the half of our parcel that we would be leasing back to the city of Bellevue.
Does that help, Scott?
Not really. I mean, I think I'm following, but it's pretty hard to do this.
So
I've got
a
it
better oriented picture for Scott.
Could you just rotate that?
I already did. I'm looking at it. I've zoomed it in. I mean, I can tell. I know roughly where the city hall should be, but it's not drawn on this thing. So at least I don't think it is. There's like a dashed line that looks like it might be a building, but I can't quite tell.
Yeah, it is
bordered to the police department at the very bottom. Yes.
City Hall is not in that picture.
Okay.
Yeah, City Hall's not. Can you guys see this image now? Hopefully it's a little clearer.
Yeah. Zoom a little closer.
So Councilmember Moore, the City Hall would be off here, kind of off screen a little bit. The property line should be about in here. So City Hall and PD would be, just sitting off on this edge. Again, it's a very busy image, but the current, you see this little faint dashed line back in here,
Mhm.
this is more or less the existing fire station footprint. Okay. And so this is the existing parcel. So then over here is and it's really hard to see, but right in here is the property line for our rental property. So Fire Station 5 will sit on our property and then use half of their existing lot for parking. And then this is the half the city would get in the current arrangement. So again, it's not on city, but it's contiguous to City Hall and PD, that lot. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
So City Hall is really to the left of this diagram as we're looking at it, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And the green area that's on the left of this diagram, is that intended as just open green space?
So that's the second part of this discussion that we kind of want to talk a little bit about, was, some of the potential options for that. So this has a lot of different ability. In the future, you could build a building, you could build additional parking, but the interim bit is, what do you do for it in the interim? Does it stay, whether it's 2 months, 10 months, 10 years, does it stay as a, grassed lot in between? Do you put a bench in there? Do you utilize it for parking? There's a variety of options that we could choose, and a discussion point. So do you want me to keep this image up, or should I stop sharing?
It doesn't matter to me.
Okay.
You can
But
leave that up. You can leave that.
Follow up on a couple of those.
Dean may want that.
So one possible use of that could be a dog park. I mean, it's a pretty good sized piece of land, it looks like.
It is I don't know how many square feet it is, but there's a lot of options for it.
Yeah. I mean, an off-leash dog park. Anyway, okay, then coming back to the main issue that you raised about the variances. I don't have any objection to a development agreement, and it does sound like it'd be more efficient. However, since there is already, it looks like some sort of a list, I mean, this is fairly far along, of the variances, I think it'd be useful if we got a chance to look at those variances and understand what they are before we sign off on going down the path of the development agreement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We would check with Fire Station 5. I have an older version of them, but yes, that's all fine to share. So I just want to make sure we have the most up to date.
Yeah.
So, yeah. There's things in Dean mentioned, again, it's a good way to wrap up sort of a bunch of issues. There's a parking determination to be made here. There's, site or building heights. There's antennas. There's attachments. I mean, there's just a whole bunch that it'd be nice to roll up into one general approval.
All right. Scott, that help answer your question? You're still on mute. Yep. Okay. And Dean H.
The city administrator talked about the whim of hearing examiner process. Is there a problem with the hearing examiner process that we need to address for the other 1,100 residences in Clyde Hill?
No, not at all. We just felt that there is always the potential for denial of a variance. I don't expect that it would be likely, but I do know that historically a Board of Adjustments did deny some variances that the city had requested some years back, and this kept control of that of this development and permitting process in essentially your hands, and the planning commission and lots of public input to it was really the goal. You get as much transparency and public input into this process as possible.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Part of why I'm asking that is I think about residents basically looking at this and saying, why don't I get the equivalent deal? And obviously there's complexity, but I think it's very important to be clear that there isn't really anything wrong with the hearing process. It's just indeterminate, I guess.
Yeah, this was to try and consolidate the process, and hopefully it'll streamline it as well. This is the development. The DAs are only intended for non-residential type projects. They're not for residential projects. So it's apples and oranges to some degree. It's not like we're looking at making this taller than 25 feet. there was some discussions about like some antennas or drying towers or some different things. For instance, I remember one of the variances had to do with where they put their utility access. Apparently, code only allows it in side yard setbacks or rear setbacks rather than front yard setbacks, and they want to put it in the front setback. So, as you can see from that picture, it is using that entire piece of property. So it's a school.
Okay.
But I mean, the idea is that it is in the public's interest that we, everybody wants this, and it's a huge asset for the city of Clyde Hill, as well as Bellevue and the rest of the Points community. So it's, you know, it's something that we want, and we, you know, within practical reasons, it's something that I'm assuming that we want.
Okay, that makes, I'm just trying to make sure we can explain it fairly. The fact that that DAs are not in any way intended for residential use makes sense. I mean, I expect that at some point we will come back and talk about Queen Bee and a development agreement with Queen Bee, since Queen Bee is in a similarly challenged situation on its lot with its setbacks and everything else. Just expecting that.
And they have an existing site, right? I mean, I guess it would depend on.
Yeah. I have one other question here. You know, the memo asks if the council concurs with this approach and, you know, seeks a decision on how to move forward. Ultimately, this is the administration's decision and it's under the administration's authority. That's right. Yes.
Yes. Been trying to be as transparent as possible and demonstrate goodwill and involve everybody in the process. Fire is going to come talk to the Points community mayors tomorrow, and they will probably be talking to you guys in the very near future as well, and the planning commission. So the public outreach, Bellevue is very interested in you know, being good neighbors and playing ball here. So this thing looks like it's go.
That's all I got. Thank you.
And I think Scott's question about just getting an appreciation for the types of variances would be helpful and also reassuring. And I like the word that you said, Dean H, around the complexity of the program too. That kind of adds a nuance here. What about Bruce or Kim? Any questions or concerns you may want to voice here so that you're getting info or we can get you info?
No, I just think thank you for the clarification of the process. I think that, you know, as kind of Steve kind of voiced, I mean, I don't want this to suddenly happen and us council have no say so, but I'm very happy that we can simplify the process, number one, and certainly it comes up to a vote of the council given this and the fact that it's also separate from a residential variance agreement. So thank you. I'm good.
This is Bruce. You've answered my questions in this dialogue, and it seems like a good way to go. I'm going to be okay with it, I think. You are going to provide the variance list. That'll help give us an idea of the scope.
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Yep. Part of this is to make sure we're getting a sense of what more information or what type of information is helpful for you. And then Dean R., do we need to do anything more about that parcel of land that may be temporarily available? I think I've heard
So
Scott mentioned dog park. So do we need any setup for
I
that?
admit that was an early thought that came to my mind. I thought of you, Dean. They 2 meetings ago, the Bellevue Fire was trying to wrap up some design work on the property, and they had kind of were pushing kind of hard for what we wanted with that property. And I was like, we're talking about 3 years down the road from now, for one, and we've frankly had no real conversations about either internally or with you or the public on what we'd like to do with that property. It's not going to be a very large piece of property. And staff thinks that we should maintain fencing along the back because there is rear access to it right now via driving, so it doesn't become a cut through for the school. We wouldn't want to increase the foot traffic for students trying to get through there where we've got fire trucks trying to get in and out of there and create any kind of hazard. But basically what we were looking at here was there was an opportunity to talk with, I've had the opportunity to talk to, I believe, 3 council members individually on this and not a couple of others. And just to throw out the idea to start getting some ideas and some brainstorming on what we can do with that. We've talked a little bit internally, and there are certainly options for making a compound for the police vehicles and creating more parking space in the back here for public works vehicles. We're not necessarily, we're looking at it potentially being about 3 years down the road, and probably for some period of potentially 3 to 5 years, and until whatever ends up happening as far as anything with a city hall down the road, potentially. So it may not be a long-term thing. I can't speak directly for the police department, but I have a sneaking suspicion that barking dogs right outside their windows could be a bit of a distraction for them, but I'll let the chief speak to that one. But really the idea here was not, I'm talking more than I really wanted to, was to hear ideas from you, and some of the ideas I've even already said came from Councilmember Friedman, for example. So
let's go ahead and go to Kim, and then we'll come back around and see what more they need so they can start thinking and what the timeline is in order to head in that direction. So Kim, you're next.
I don't.
Oh, I just had a.
Go ahead.
I just had a question. I just dawned on me that the house on there kind of offsets some of our arch commitments. Does this have an impact on arch? Considering we will not, I mean, we don't have a lot of low income housing to begin with, but the fact that we're giving up our only low income housing, is that going to affect our arch status? And do we need to give more money to arch or some offset there?
John, if you don't
That
mind.
would be John Greenwood.
Taking that one.
This will not affect our membership in Arch. What we get in monies from the rental facility there, we use to help fund our trust fund allocation on an annual basis. It will just mean if the city council wishes to maintain that same level, they will need to find alternative revenue sources or provide more general fund revenue to Arch for the trust fund. And I will remind council that trust fund is 100% optional.
Sure. Okay. So in theory, I mean, if we do some kind of partial lease back too, that could offset some of those arch funds, right? So, okay. Thank you.
That
Yeah.
was some of our intent.
Thanks.
Yes.
Mhm.
Good job. Yeah, good question. Okay, Kim, anything more?
Nope. I'm good. Thank you.
All right, Steve, you're next.
Yeah, I realize I guess my number one, well, there's 2 approaches you take on that piece of property. Either we use it for the services we offer to the community to help enhance those, or we find some mechanism to, I'll say, turn it into give it a more public use, such as the dog park. And I would go, my thinking, I think, Dean, I told you, is I would go to staff and to the departments and ask them if that would allow them to do their job more efficiently. And I'd start with the police department. As I was thinking about it, if parking there makes it easier for them to get in and out and to do their job, then that's a good thing. And it may be worthwhile. So I'd start there and I look for you guys to recommend back to us the options, but your recommendation. So.
Okay. Thank you. Let me see. I'm going to go next to third on my list. Oh, next is Dean H. I think, Kim, your hand's still up, I think. Maybe not. There you go.
So the
Got it.
timing of this is perfect with respect to the comprehensive plan, because
Yeah.
they're going to do a great public outreach and get that feedback loop going. I think this is a great thing to be able, in addition to what Councilmember Friedman said about asking the departments, especially starting with the police department, understanding from the community. This should be a very easy, positive public engagement for that comprehensive plan effort. The other question, this is, I think, like fine to answer in like 3 or 4 months or whenever this comes back, is much in the same way that the redevelopment of the public schools provided a huge income for the city from all the construction materials that we're going through. I'm assuming that this will be a positive surprise for us in terms of city coffers as that building gets built. Yes. Okay, so it's just at some point when we come back with the agreement, it would be really great to see what that does to our budget, to our expected revenues.
Alrighty. Thank you. Steve DiGilio.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just, we are only peripherally involved and have not been asked, and deferring to the new city attorney to work on more details of this, but I do make an observation that as I see where this project is going in terms of process, the city council will be entering at least 2 contracts, perhaps more. And for each of those contracts, state law requires a public hearing before the city council. Under the Intergovernmental Disposition of Property Act, which is the most convenient way for the cities to do business in this regard, each of the city councils will have to conduct a public hearing. And under the Growth Management Act provisions that authorize development agreements, again, there is a requirement for a public hearing before the city council regarding the consideration and ratification of a development agreement. So at least at this point, you're going to be seeing this perhaps more than you'd like to.
Very good. Got a process to follow.
Yeah, and also thanks, Steve. To be clear, we've also talked we did spend some time with your partner Kenan on the subject and got his advice on this as well. So.
Okay, so Dinar, we have enough input to know some next steps. You're okay? We'll move on to the
good,
next step.
and unless anybody wants to have any more input on what they want or thoughts on that land, then I'm good.
Well, I'm hearing us to come back and survey the crew and see if they can make some recommendations as well. So
Okay,
we'll
very good.
throw spaghetti on the wall and see what will stick. Okay, thanks
Thank you.
everyone. With that topic is launched, and you can be thinking about that. We are now going to move on. Next is going to be what was the old 3.5 discussion regarding complaint reporting and code enforcement. A lot of possibilities, and not sure what you guys want or where you want to go. So I know, Steve, you had mentioned at the last council meeting wanting to see a list of complaints, and the city staff has provided that for you in this packet, just to kind of give you guys a viewing off of that. So
Mayor, I'm sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
so
I
Scott-
believe when we amended the agenda, we added the one that I suggested before the code enforcement. So this was.
Oh, did you want that one before the code? I'm sorry, Scott. Okay.
I believe that's
Chapter 2 discussion.
approved.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I had it
Okay.
afterwards, so my error. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, so for my colleagues on the council, I just encourage you to bring up the city code and go to chapter 2. So it's called Title 2 Administration and Personnel. And I've read this and been thinking about this quite a bit lately, and a couple of things have struck me when I review these, and I've compared them with other cities, nearby cities. And in Clyde Hill, there is an enormous amount of power that is vested in the city administrator position, far more than, in my opinion, is healthy. And for example, in Medina, like in Clyde Hill, the mayor appoints city administrator. The only approval that the council has is for the contract. So it's a one-time shot. And the same thing is true for the city attorney. I actually couldn't find in the code where the city attorney is even appointed. I'm sure it's in here, but I couldn't find it tonight. But like in Medina and in many other cities near us, the city administrator has to be confirmed by a majority of the council. I personally think that's a really good idea. I think it's really not a good idea to have one elected official have that much power, the mayor, to appoint a city administrator who's not elected, who's not a resident of the city of Clyde Hill, and then basically, they can do whatever they want. And if you guys read this through, you'll see it's very broad in terms of the powers and authority that are vested in the position of the city administrator. None of this is directed at anybody on this call right now. It's just more of an observation about our government and the form of our government. So, like I said, I'm not going to make a motion tonight, but I would encourage, the rest of the council to think about this a little bit. And then I'd like to bring it back up in the future, and I probably will have some specific proposals at that time. One of which would just be simply to make the city administrator position be subject to a majority vote of the council to be sworn in or confirmed. And then I think, Medina has an interesting thing where they do an annual review of their city administrator. The council performs an annual review. I don't know whether that has financial implications or not, but it probably should. And I think that's a very good practice as well, to have an annual review for this position, because it is so important. Another thought might be a 2-year contract, or something like that, some sort of specified point where city council gets another bite at the apple if they want to at the end of the contract, whether they want to continue with the same individual or not. So those are just some thought starters, really. And then I think the same thing applies to the appointment of the city attorney. And as I think we all know, city attorney has been a fairly controversial and highly time-consuming position in Clyde Hill for about the last year. I think it would have been a lot smoother if we had more clear guidance in the code about the city attorney. So, for example, if the city attorney has to be confirmed, the choice of city attorney has to be confirmed by council, I think that would have helped, and I think would help going forward. I think, again, similar to what I said about the administrator, Medina has a 2-year contract. It's on their website. I've read it. It's a very good contract, and they don't sign up once and then just let it run as long as the mayor feels like it. They do it for a specific period of time, and then they come back at it. And that is really important, I think, because it means that whoever's on the performing end of that contract, they know that it's not just a gravy train. They know that they're not going to be operating on a 33-year-old letter agreement, for legal services. They're going to actually have to earn it, and they're going to have to be up for review and renewal on at least a biannual basis for the attorney and the city administrator. So those were the thoughts. The other one that I wanted to just tee up, and I'd love to hear some thoughts if people have reaction now, but if they don't, that's okay too. You think about it and come back at it. But the other one is how vacancies are filled for the council. Because I think that's fairly vague right now, and I think it's it's like, well, at least in the past, what it's been is that the mayor kind of polls everybody and says, "Hey, what do you think about this person?" And then everybody kind of goes, "Oh, okay," and then we vote on it. But I think that should probably be more formal as well, in terms of and not really just city council, could also apply to like the planning commission, the civil service commission. I mean, these are posts that are occupied by residents, and I think it's important to, at a minimum, advertise the fact that we'd have an opening. Let's say somebody decides to drop off the council before the end of their term, that we should advertise that fact, give people in the city, enough notice and time that they can consider whether they want to throw their hat in the ring. And then have an actual process, sort of like what we've just done with the city attorney, to choose a candidate. Now, if there's only one person, then fine. But if there's more than one, that there's some kind of a process. So that's the other one, is openings on the council that, outside of the normal election cycle, the appointment and performance review of the administrator, and likewise for the city attorney. So those are the things in this section that I wanted to tee up for discussion. If people want to have a discussion right now, or we can come back at it later. Thank you.
All right, let me go down the council member. Then I see Dean R's hand, and maybe Steve DiGiulio may want to respond just to help out. So Dean H, go for it.
I want to thank Councilmember Moore. I hadn't really thought about those issues that way. I want to point out Medina's process, if we set aside form of government as an enormous thing, Medina's process is relatively new, and I think the most relevant part for where we are right now, just to be immediate, is the work plan. So I think they have a very public process around the work plan. My experience here in Clyde Hill is that we've talked about it as part of the budget process, and I think that there might be some short-term lessons or short-term changes, improvements we could make. Whatever formal or informal there is, just talking about here's the work that's going to get done over the next year. Councilmember Moore raised one other question I actually wanted to ask Interim City Attorney DiGiulio about this. I brought up 2.07010, and it says the city administrator's salary shall be approved by the city council. And I think my question is that like once, or is that every change to salary is approved by city council? I'm not sure how to interpret that. Thank you.
The easy answer to that question is that the council, as part of its annual budget, approves compensation that isn't otherwise locked in by contract. So if you have a contract for employment, then that is the basis for compensation for the term of the contract. If it's not documented in a contract, then it's done by the city council when it approves the annual or biannual budget.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like it might be helpful to Councilmember Moore's questions to email a copy of that contract around to the council, just so we can understand what that is. Thank you.
Just to be clear, you're asking for a copy of Dean's contract.
Correct.
Okay. And also just to answer a question that Scott had, and Steve Friedman, you might because you were the recipient of that when I stepped into the mayor position. I had term left, and we did advertise, and we did form a small group, and we did interview candidates, and then we brought it into discussion with the council to make the decision for who we would then appoint. So I agree with you. It needs to be a process where people know about it, and that we have the ability to interview and do the best to make the selection, because as we find out, if we do our job right and everything's going well, then the individual will be hopefully motivated and will want to kind of remain on and put the name on the ballot and continue. So just mention that. Let me see, Dean R, and then I'll go back to Scott.
Yeah, I was actually just going to raise my hand to suggest that perhaps City Attorney DiGiulio explain a little bit about the form of government and the appointing of positions.
I've got a couple of points very quickly.
I think I'm next. So, and I just want to make the point that well, this is a council study session, and I feel like Dean Rolla has spoken more than any council member in this meeting, and that I'm kind of getting tired of that. So, you know,
Point of order, Scott. That is really a derogatory comment. We're all here as a member. City council is comprised with the mayor. We participate with our thing.
Point of order.
I've called a point of order and have called out my rationale for that.
The chair does not call a point of order.
Yes, a chair does call point of order. You can smirk if you want, Dean, but I've talked with Ann McFarland as well. And it's my job to make sure that if there are inappropriate comments that are made, that I call them out. It is my job to make sure everybody is speaking and reacting respectfully.
I'll
So
rephrase
this is
what I
a
was
study
saying.
session, and I'm just, I had called on DNR to contribute any portion of the discussion.
And then DNR called on DiGiulio. So, you know,
I deferred to him.
Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second. Is there a quick sentence here, Steve, to finish the thought on this? And then I'd like to go to Scott's question. His hand was
Yeah,
up.
no, very, very quickly. There's a couple of quick observations. First, on filling of vacancies on the council, it's specified by state law. It's a provision that is governed by 42-12-070. Upon a vacancy, the city council has 90 days to fill the vacancy. If it doesn't fill the vacancy within 90 days, then it goes to the county council, and the city council loses its authority to do that. And the council will determine what procedure it will use to solicit people who are interested in serving in that position. Certainly, in terms of confirmation of appointed positions, the state law does specifically allow for confirmation of certain positions in city government. The current code doesn't provide for that for the city administrator position, but certainly it could. The other point is that it is problematic to refer to the Medina model, where the city manager reports to the council, versus a council mayor form of government where the city administrator reports to the mayor. And there's certainly not an issue in terms of, you can have a similar contract in structure, but the reporting requirements are fundamentally different, and the ability to control that position is fundamentally different based upon the nature of the government. So just a quick observation on that.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, Scott, your question or comment.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that actually teased me up quite well, which is to say that I was going to make the same point, that Medina does have a council manager form as opposed to a mayor, a council form of government. And we also have the ability to change that. So we could go to a council manager form if we chose to as a city. Now it would require, as I understand it, a referendum. So something would have to get onto the ballot in order to do it. But if it were to pass, I think it has to pass both the city council with a majority and then a majority of the voters in Clyde Hill. And then we would become a city or a council manager government instead of a mayor council form. So again, lots of ideas here that I'm teeing up. I'm not trying to make a decision tonight, but I think all of these are worth the council putting some thought into and considering what we might want to do about all of these things, because I think there's a lot of room for improvement on some of these appointed positions, as well as on consideration for whether we want to consider changing the form of government. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, final comment, and then we're going to move on to the next subject. Steve, hand up. Steve DiGiulio.
Yeah, just very quickly, the legislature actually amended the procedures regarding the change in the form of government in this last session. So there is a new piece of legislation. It simplifies somewhat, but Councilmember Moore is correct that it does require council-initiated process, then a vote of the people.
Sorry, question.
Go ahead, Dean.
About that. The council can pass resolution to this. I thought there's also a petition path, or is that not? My understanding is that residents can, on their own power, take it upon themselves.
I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Frankly, most of the time it's been initiated, my experience has been initiated by a council, but it can certainly be initiated by the people, and I'll follow up with a confirmation on that.
Thank you.
Great. All right, we okay to move on? You got your thoughts going on that topic? Okay. Am I right that now we're going on to the complaint recording and code enforcement topic? There we are. And thank you, Dean H.
I'm going to ask Mr. DiGiulio to offer some framing comments here. I had some questions about this. He and I had a conversation, and I'm looking to him to perhaps offer some help as we try to approach this conversation. Given the many conversations we've had, it might be helpful to bring up the document that I sent out, because I tried to have a précis of the conversations we've had basically since September on this topic. And so before we go to another loop, I'm hoping Mr. DiGiulio can help us do good here. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to provide some oversight and comment. Some of this you will recognize as having been influenced by over 40 years of serving city government on these issues. And I will also observe that the city of Clyde Hill is different in that it has apparently more resources to address issues that in some communities, as Tom Brubaker suggested in his comments, may not find that the cities have the resources to address, particularly with respect to private issues that may arise. You have observed this just in the short time that I've been here, the council reacting to what are private interests, but the city taking them on, I'm thinking about the stormwater issue as a public burden, which, as we've discussed, is within the city's authority, but nevertheless is an example of the city of Clyde Hill taking on something that, in my experience, most cities would not do. Okay, with that background in mind, then we shift to the process, and this becomes both a legal issue and a governance issue, and legality and governance aren't necessarily synonymous. In terms of the legal framework, it is clear that the council, through its adoption of the city's ordinances, its police power determinations, and I say the council in Clyde Hill certainly includes the mayor, because it is the legislative authority, mayor and council together, that adopt ordinances. So in that process, that is the setting for the enforcement framework under which city administration may work. If the city has not enacted a law that prevents people from having snakes or lizards in their homes, then the mayor and her administration are not going to be involved in enforcing regulations regarding snakes and lizards. So the council has that clear authority. Then once those are adopted, then you have the enforcement mechanism, which rests solely in the hands of the executive. And we talk about that in, your focus, a lot of your focus is on code enforcement in the land use regulatory setting, but the discretionary authority of an executive branch extends throughout the entirety of the city's enforcement process. And I mentioned this in another meeting, if a police officer determines not to write a ticket for speeding or whatever, it becomes that's a discretionary determination, which is within the executive's authority. In the case of a police officer, that's the mayor essentially delegating to the police department that discretionary authority. If the mayor wanted to tell the chief, you're going to write tickets here, there, and everywhere, then it's up to the chief to do that. But typically that's a hands-off type approach. But again, it is the mayor's authority to do that. And the council's authority is simply one of inquiry. the council can ask for reports from the executive on these issues and what's going on with them. The council can certainly criticize the mayor for her administration of code enforcement, enforcement of the various provisions of city law, or the overuse of enforcement, claiming that it may be a abuse of the resources of the city. But ultimately, while she is in office, it is her authority to determine when and how the code should be enforced or not, determining whether or not these kinds of issues warrant the consideration of the city. You get complaints from people in the neighborhood. Some of them may rise to complaints that justify the city's involvement. Some may not. Again, that's a determination that's made on a discretionary basis by the executive branch, subject to the council's ability to inquire and be informed about what's going on. So I don't know, Councilmember Akamovich, whether that's what you were looking for, but that's a little bit of background that I think is important in this difficult area, that is both separation of powers and also good governance.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think there's one other part, which is what recourse does council have if council has issues with enforcement?
We've talked about this previously. On the regulatory side, the council can take action to amend the city's code to modify or repeal the provisions that give rise to, a disputed enforcement mechanism. So, pick an example. The city council doesn't want the mayor writing citations or notices of violation for people keeping snakes and lizards. They could repeal that provision of the city code that prohibits people from keeping snakes and lizards in their home. We talked about, on an interim basis, in the land use context, adopting a moratorium on the provisions of those codes and the process for enacting a moratorium. And then the process for amending the development regulations, the control of land use in the community, would then go to the process that, frankly, the city's already got teed up, I think, as I understand it correctly, with a update of the comprehensive plan and the development regulations that must then follow the comprehensive plan in terms of their under the Growth Management Act, because it is the development regulations that are responsible for the implementation of the direction of the comprehensive plan. So if the city council wants to require greater setbacks, higher fences, lower fences, tree height, whatever it wants to deal with, trailers in driveways, that's the process for a review of the code. Planning Commission, public hearings at the Planning Commission, decision by the Planning Commission, recommendation of the council, then council further consideration, including potential public hearings before the city council as well. And that's the process for doing that. Other than with respect to the code itself, the council's authority is that of inquiry and information requests to the executive.
Thank you.
You're on mute.
I am on mute. I have to mute myself. There we go. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Well, Attorney DiGiulio just more or less made the point I was going to make, which is that we do have the authority to temporarily suspend laws, and I'm going to make a motion to that effect in a minute when we get to the discussion of the prior motion that I had brought up, the more resolution as it's mentioned here on the agenda. So with that, I'll just wait until we get to that part.
Right. Council, what questions or comments do you have here on this topic? Steve, looks like you're going to speak.
No, I'm trying to decide. Thank
Okay,
you.
sorry.
Thank you. And I'm adjusting my chair.
All right, very fine. Let me make sure I go through the council here first. Bruce, are you still processing?
I'm trying to find my hand, so.
There you are.
There
Okay,
you
here you
go.
are.
All right.
Yeah, you can just raise it.
No, first of all, I appreciate the request to have the list that staff put together on complaints. I think that was really helpful. And I mean, and the analysis I went through, well, I guess I'm gonna wait till Scott makes his motion. The types of things that are in that relate to the types of things that are at least in the list here. And I think I'll wait till he makes his motion before offering that observation. But this was very useful for the open items that we had over these first 3 months, and dipping a little bit back into last year, although it was recognized that there's more beyond those, and the 3 that are open have quite a history, I guess. And anyway, I hope this will be kept up so that we can be kept aware of complaints and the status of them.
All right. Appreciate you taking a read of that and finding that of value. Steve.
Yeah, Dean R. Thanks for the report, appreciated, and I'm glad we've moved forward on that. What I would additionally like to see would be some detail on the resolution. What brought it to being closed? Was it a complaint that through city policy we decided not that it was not something that could be addressed? Was it resolved by some other some rulings? I would like to know what happened there, so that we can get a sense of how many complaints we're getting that we're not acting on. And that's my term. It's not a criticism. It's just based upon the policy we have. I'd like to get an idea how the policy does impact the complaints that we have, how many we ultimately don't have to do anything on, and then something we are. So I'd like some summary to say, how did we get it to close? That would be very helpful to me, including the ones that are on this list at this point that have been closed. That'd be helpful.
Okay, so perhaps like a resolution field or something like that.
Yes, a field like that. I think that would be sufficient. I like that you put the part of the code that was impacted. That I think that was relevant and something important. So now I want to know, how it was resolved ultimately.
Right, I thought it was really important to note that there were 15 through 3 months, and that only 2, as of the end of March, were in an open status. 7 of these were actually Title VIII complaints, and we've been talking at some length over the last number of months about Title 17 complaints, for instance. Title VIII, Title 12, 2 Title 15s, 4 Title 17s, of which one's abused sunlight, and one wasn't even actually it was a complaint that a stop sign had been knocked down, right? So not actually a code complaint. And then there were still 3 outstanding from last year, of which 2 were view sunlights. So I'd probably have to defer to Sarah to go through resolutions, but I think it's safe to say it's kind of all over the board. Frequently we contact them. We tell them they're out of compliance, and they resolve it. Other times it takes more work than that. Other times we deem that they're not materially impacted.
Well, I guess I would want to know, we decided it wasn't an appropriate complaint. That would be the neighbor didn't impact the neighbor. Another would be that parties resolve it. The third would be whatever, ultimately the one area would come in and what the city had ultimately ruled when it got that far. Be good to know how many get resolved before it gets to you.
Okay.
So that was my
Yep.
that was my review of that. Thank you.
Sean, did you pop on to add a comment there? It looked like, or
Yeah, I was going to mention we do track that. So the summary tab is what is shared in that report, but we do have a beefier bit that has, you know, mailings and contact dates and then resolution items. So we could certainly add a resolution column or kind of a progress column. And again, generally those are occurring in the first
Well, that
contact.
begs the question: what are the other columns that you have that might be relevant for us to see?
Yeah, it's just contact. So usually there's like a first date or second date, you know, if it continues type of thing.
Okay.
We had that spreadsheet available if you wanted to see it.
Yeah, I can pull it up. I have it right here.
Let's
If
go
you guys
ahead.
want to see it.
Go for it.
Assuming we're not going to be disclosing
Or-
any names or anybody's.
It will disclose names, but it's public information.
That's kind of, yeah. That's why we've done the summary and the council reports, is just to kind of leave a little bit of that. But again, it's
That's up to the rest of the council if they care to see, if they need to see that.
you
If
want
not,
that here, or do you want that with your council packet? What would the council like?
I think perhaps you could just send the link before we flash all this information up.
yeah. I'm fine with separate.
Okay.
Fair enough.
All right. Kim, I lose track of you because I know you don't have video. Anything you wish to comment and make sure you have input?
No, I'm just, I'm still kind of trying to absorb what the ask is here, if there's an ask or if it's just an open discussion.
Well, I think it's going to head back to Scott here. Here we go. Hands up.
I will make the ask. Before I make my motion, though, I just want to make an observation on this list. I don't find this to be particularly useful. For one thing, there's a bunch of stuff in here about building codes. I think that's completely irrelevant. And then in terms of living fence enforcement, I had an enforcement done to my wife and I recently. That's not on here, probably because it wasn't a complaint. The city just decided to do it. So I really question whether this list is actually that useful. But in any event, let me just get to my motion, and I want to frame this by saying to the council members that we've been through quite a bit around code enforcement here last several months. I thought Councilmember Hakamovich, sorry, I wrote up a good memo that had kind of a timeline with it. So it's worth looking at that, because we used a lot of time in council meetings and staff time on these things. And from my perspective, and I think Attorney DeGiulio also said that most cities don't get involved in neighbor disputes like we have. And I think that's probably for good reason. I heard the same thing from the MRSC attorney that I talked to a couple months ago about this, where he used to be at Kirkland as a code enforcement officer, and he said his job was to avoid getting the city involved in private disputes, things like, for example, the dispute down in Aqua Vista over flags and other things like that. So because we've now established that we do have the authority as a city council to temporarily suspend enforcement of Title 17 codes while we're doing the comprehensive plan review, I want to exercise that power tonight on a limited basis. I want to make a very specific proposal, but I want to frame this by saying I think there are probably other sections of the code that we should consider suspending as well, because we are operating with code that is dated from 1990 and some of it from 1999, and that is a long time ago, and a lot has changed. And I think that some of these regulations just do not make any sense. Certainly, from when I've talked to many residents about the stuff around plantings and everything, and most people have no idea that it's even in there. And when they understand it, they think it's a bad idea. So, with that as my preamble, I move that the City of Clyde Hill temporarily suspend enforcement of Title 17, Chapter 17.37.020 subsection C and D, pending completion of the update to the comprehensive plan currently underway.
I'm sorry, can you say it again? 17 dot what?
17.37.020 subsection C and D. So I'll tell you what those say. These have to do with living fences. And so section C is front yard fences in the right of way and aesthetic softening of the fence, stuff that, in my opinion, doesn't make any sense. And then section D is, prescribes the kind of landscaping that you can have. Now, I think, as we all know, the city is, and as the mayor has acknowledged publicly, the city is completely out of compliance with these anyway. So I think it's unfortunate that the city has chosen to selectively enforce these sections of the code, and I think we should stop doing that immediately. And so that's what motivates mine. And I don't have a dog in the hunt anymore, so to speak, but I don't want anybody else to have to go through what my wife and I went through at the hands of the city. So that's why I'm proposing this.
We have a motion on the table. I don't know, Steve, do I need to go to you next? Are we embarking on some parliamentarian thing, or can yours wait for the discussion section? Steve DiGiulio.
No, I just wanted to observe that Councilmember Moore's proposal would require implementation through an ordinance. And if this is something that the council chooses to move forward with, then we would draft such an ordinance for availability at your next meeting.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
Hmm.
Let me see here. Dean H.
I think that it makes sense. I just want to clarify one bit. This would be a temporary moratorium. And I'm not sure what the boundary is. Is it a date? Is it the comprehensive plan being done? Is it the planning commission revisiting part C and D of 1737?
Well, my idea was for it to be a moratorium that remains in place until the comprehensive plan review that we're currently doing is completed. So I don't know whether that's a year or 2 years or whatever, but I suspect that these sections of the code are going to be reviewed, and certainly, to the extent that I have any input on it, I'm going to strongly advise that we change them. But in the meantime, I think it's causing a lot of problems, and not just with me. My problem's gone, but other people are having problems with this, and it's if we don't do something to take this discretionary authority away, I think we're going to continue to deal with it. We're going to continue to alienate our neighbors and residents of the city.
Just to be clear, the statute authorizing moratoria provides for a public hearing within 60 days of its adoption. So if you were to adopt it next Tuesday, then you'd have to have a public hearing within 60 days. Then you are required to enter findings and conclusions. And then basically, I'm paraphrasing from 35A 63 220. A moratorium or interim zoning ordinance adopted under this section may be effective for not longer than 6 months, but may be effective for up to 1 year if a work plan is developed for related studies, et cetera, et cetera. And then it may be renewed for 1 or more 6 months period if a subsequent public hearing is held. I will send this statutory citation to the council together with a note on the change in the form of government to confirm it may be initiated by the council by resolution or by petition as well. And I'll send that to you, if not tonight, then first thing in the morning.
So just to clarify one question on that, we could, because my understanding is we can repeal it temporarily. So I don't know if moratorium is just a semantic word here or what, but the MRSC told me that we could repeal sections of that section temporarily.
Well, you can, yes, assuming that it is not inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, then you can repeal your code by ordinance. And again, however the council determines it wants to move forward, we could do the necessary drafting and have it available for you, but it would have to be done by ordinance.
Okay, well, my intention is to repeal it temporarily. So I like that a lot better than a temporary moratorium that requires us to do a 60-day thing, only lasts 6 months. I'm talking about repealing it until the code enforcement, until the code review is complete.
And just again, for a repeat of reminder, folks, the comprehensive plan and everything is due of December of 2024. John? Why am I questioning that? Yeah, 24, right?
Yes, there was a recent change in this legislative session that kicked it back 6 months, but that's also because they are preparing to provide more requirements and more work to be done.
Right. So just so you have a date in mind for when that needs to be in play. Let me go to Bruce Jones.
Right. I hadn't explored sections C and D of 173720 before, but before I could feel comfortable doing something like this, I would want to know what, if those were not there, what would residents be able to do? Not what would they be able to continue to have that might have been not in compliance, but what things could they initiate? And I haven't read these, that these code elements are in, at least in some way, intending to keep from happening. So I would like to make sure that that gets written up and provided.
All right. Steve Friedman.
Thank you. Question again on over to the other Steve here. We've discussed the difference between an ordinance and a resolution. And resolution is an advisory from the council to the, I'll say, to the mayor and the administration and staff. It seems to me that the option on a moratorium is one that we could do by resolution, and we can do that easily. Can we do anything, and why would you not be able to advise them of that?
You cannot modify by moratorium or otherwise the code by resolution, only by ordinance.
So, okay, so
I say that legally. Politically, if the council says, Mayor, we really want you to not do this, then it's up to the mayor to decide whether or not she wants to acknowledge the resolution. And you recognize that the city of Clyde Hill over the years has engaged in the process of adopting resolutions that the mayor has concurred with and acted on accordingly. Typically, a contract, for example, is approved by resolution.
So, okay. Well, that helps. So the city, in order to implement and administer some of the codes, they create policies. And enforcement is one that is enforced through a policy that the city acts that tries to determine whether somebody bringing a complaint is an appropriate person, and they've decided what is appropriate and what's not, to bring that complaint so that the city can make a decision on acting. So the question is, the policy could be updated by the city to take care of this issue should they wish. Should we all agree on that? Isn't that possible? I mean, they're acting on a policy right now.
The city councils, when you say policy, Councilmember Friedman, your policy is expressed by law. And the law is set forth in the code. And so only the executive has the authority to enforce the code, to take the enforcement actions under that. Again, the council can express its intent, its interest, its policy on how the executive may want to assert or exercise that authority, but it is not controlling on the independently elected office of
Yeah.
the executive.
Yeah, and I understand that. I appreciate that piece of it. I guess, the purpose to me of the report that we're seeing is to be transparent about how many issues are out there and how many are affecting the community and how many are affecting staff that they have to take care of. And my hope was that either we would see that there aren't that many issues that really require us to act further, or we would see specific items in there that would give us all reason to sit down and figure out how to manage this more effectively as a city without having to amend ordinances or codes or any of that types of things. So, and I'm not really sure regarding Scott's motion. I'm sure that'll come up to a discussion in a little more detail. But the thing that concerns me now, though, is if the city makes a decision in implementing the code, or maybe it's the mayor, and that's what I'm referencing as a policy. They've already said, we think it's a violation of a code, or can be reviewed as a violation of the code only if there is if a neighbor is impacted by this and makes the complaint, as an example. So that's a policy. The city made a policy in order to make sure that they could manage the detail of how many issues could potentially come up in the code. So I guess I'm confused. I'm almost going back to the original discussion. I don't have a problem with your answer yet, but I'm confused because policy to me is a mechanism to interpret the code, and interpretation can be changed.
Again, the council can express its intent, its interpretation, but the enforcement rests with the mayor.
All right. Well, and I'm not trying to argue with you, Steve, as much as I was trying to understand. So thank you.
You're muted.
Yeah, I know. I have distant background, so I didn't want that to bother you guys. So Dean H. next.
I think I'm tracking Councilmember Friedman's comments, and I wanted to ask, I think I wanted to ask the same question slightly differently. I understand that there are ordinances that make municipal code, and policy is what the administration goes and does with it. If I'm understanding him correctly, the council could, I guess, in theory, pass an ordinance that would modify the code that might say complaints, complaints cannot be limited to only neighbors. I'm making this up just to make sure I understand. Steve, does that make sense? It's that from a changing of policy point of view, I guess we could try to put more policy into the actual municipal code and remove ambiguity there.
Right.
I'm not saying that that's what we want to do in this case. I'm just illustrating it.
Yeah.
I guess my question for Mr. DiGiulio is, could the council go through and make a statement that explicit in an ordinance, or is that, again, I'm not trying to circumvent stuff. I'm just trying to understand the boundaries of how this works. Go ahead.
Okay. Let me exercise some discretion in the few days I have remaining in this position and suggest that from a management standpoint, if the council tells the mayor, we really would prefer that you not enforce the living, you enforce removal of landscaping from public rights of way unless it's an absolute violation of the Uniform Code of Traffic Safety or whatever that's called. And if the mayor says no, then your alternative is an ordinance.
Yeah. Okay.
To
what happened?
to do that.
Yeah.
But if in a government that's functioning effectively, it may very well be that the mayor will say, if you don't want us to be focusing on these issues, and that's the intent of the council, then that's fine. That's the direction I'll take as a matter of the council's policy. And we'll respond to any complaints from neighbors by just simply saying refer, that we're not, that's not something that the city of Clyde Hill is currently dealing with. And then you avoid ordinances, you avoid all the rest. So that's a management approach. But from a legal standpoint, if the mayor says, no, I'm going to continue to do continue to enforce what I want to enforce, because that's what the code says, then your only alternative is to adopt an ordinance.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, let me see here. Dean, did your question get, your comments get addressed? I want to make sure.
No, I've actually got, oh, wrong Dean.
Yeah, sorry, that was Dean Dean H, excuse me.
Yeah, I just lowered my hand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then let me go to Scott, and then I'll do Dean R.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that what Attorney DiGiulio just said is pretty much what is motivating me with this motion, because we have discussed this. The mayor has said very clearly that she is going to enforce the code as it's written, and she's done so. Okay. And there are pending, there's a dispute down in Aqua Vista right now involving a citizen and the city that, in my opinion, the city should back off of. Like, I don't understand why we're spending money and time on enforcing these landscaping laws, which are absurd, in my opinion, and have no place in city law. And again, were written 30 years ago. So it is my opinion that the sense of the council has been, yeah, it would be good if we don't do this kind of thing. And yet we're still doing it, right? And we keep getting sucked back into these things that are largely private disputes and should be settled among private parties, in my opinion. But the city gets involved and, it turns into a giant mess. So I just want to say again to my fellow city council members, we have power as legislators. Okay, we can change the law. Let's do it. Let's just do it in this one small, narrow area. I don't think there's anything too scary that could happen if we temporarily repeal these. I've deliberately made it very narrow. If anybody has specific concerns, raise them. That's fine. I don't see that there would be any, so I'd like us to vote on it. I'd like us to prove that we can actually change the law, right? Like, there's a lot of laws here. All those laws have been passed by previous city councils of the city. We haven't really passed very many laws. We really haven't. So we kind of, we've beaten this thing into the ground about, well, if we do a resolution, that's just our opinion that has no power. It doesn't bind anybody. So I just really want to try. Let's just do one where it actually does change what happens in the city. That's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Dean R.
Okay, I just I want to make sure we're looking at what I'm seeing. We're looking at 1737-020 C and D. Is that correct, Scott?
Check my notes.
Okay.
Yep. C and D.
Okay. So I read C to say that front yard fences shall be located not less than 2 feet from the right-of-way line. Is this going to mean then that we can put fences of any type right up to the property line? So you're putting it up, essentially up to a roadway. And then the part D, I believe that was the whole point to the whole urban forest management guide that the city had put together. And if we take out D, that negates the all the work that was done on that once upon a time. I think that was about 6 or 7 years ago that was last published, if I remember right. So that's,
The ordinance is dated 1999.
what's that?
The ordinance is dated from 1999.
Okay, I think the urban forestry guide was more recent than that. So then, what I haven't heard, so what I thought this was to discuss complaints. So we've talked over the course of the last several meetings about how we're handling them now. Is there something about the way we are handling them now based on being materially impacted or being a direct neighbor or whatever that is bothering the council? I mean, I think, yeah, anyway, I'll leave my question at that part. And I guess my third item is a point of information on this that you keep stating, and that is that it was a code enforcement action that was taken on you and your property, and it was not a code enforcement action. It was a contract action, different item, and that's why it doesn't show up on any reports. So
that only stemmed from the fact that it was a code enforcement action several years prior. We know that.
So
don't misrepresent.
To my question of how would you have complaints handled differently? And let's hear it from everybody. What this is for, right?
All right, Dean H.
I appreciate the city administrator's question. I want to suggest that there's a thread we had going before he asked that I think is worth trying to wrap up. I think that Councilmember Jones asked an excellent question that basically says, were these two pieces of code no longer enforced through whatever mechanism? What are the consequences going forward? Regardless of what already exists, what are the consequences going forward? And I think that hearing that from the administration would be super helpful before taking a vote. That's one aspect. The other aspect I want to suggest is that there's a very specific statement from Councilmember Moore, and I think it's worth spending this time here now to figure out what we actually do with it. I think that there's this notion of 1737-020 Part C and D. Great. I don't know exactly. In order to vote for something, my understanding, Mr. Giulio, is that it actually needs to be written down as some flavor of ordinance. And we can't vote on something that hasn't been written down. So perhaps right now, the thing for us to do is to get clarity around what an appropriate mechanism is and when it might be able to be written. I think that that's the most immediate and sensible thing to do, but I defer to the rest of the council about action. Thank you.
Scott, I think you're prepared to answer.
Yeah, I have no objection to that. In fact, I think that's a good suggestion. So why don't we just table my motion until next Tuesday? That'll give the city an opportunity to address Bruce Jones's question. Like, what if we did that? And for Mr. DiGiulio to write up this motion in a proper form so that it actually has the effect of changing the law, which is my intention. So I have no problem with it. And I'll withdraw the motion for now, and I'll come back at it next Tuesday if that's okay.
All right. Any other comments that sound okay?
Question, Mr. DiGiulio, do you have? I'm sorry, Mr. DiGiulio, do you have what you need to draft that, or is there ambiguity?
I do have an approach to drafting. I want to make sure just to be mindful of protocol that there is a third council member who would like to see such a draft ordinance.
You want me to ask for a motion to pass for original?
No, we don't. typically at a study session, you're not going to be taking action.
Right.
I just need to have a sense of the council. If there's a third council member that would like to see such an ordinance, then
thank
we can commit to getting the draft to you, by the end of
Yes,
the
thank
week.
you. Yeah, get a
Sure.
protocol on that, Steve. Thank you very much.
I'm pointing towards my hand.
Okay, see your hand there, Steve Friedman.
It's raised.
Well
Okay,
played.
your hand's raised, so you'd
That
like
would
to
be very
see
helpful to
that
me
brief.
because I need
Okay,
some.
and
Good. Okay.
And if I understood Bruce Jones's earlier question, I think that would help you, Bruce, too. You'd like to have time to review and to read this and see what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Well, I just want to be clear. The issue that I have is there is some code there that drives the way that we operate our city. And that there may or may not be certain circumstances in the town that are in violation in that, or residents have followed that, maybe to their expense. My question is, if you eliminate it completely, what
Yeah.
does it mean? I mean,
Yeah.
it means something to those that were forced to do it the way it was. And it means a lot of things. I just don't grasp. I understand the moratorium where you're not enforcing it. I don't understand eliminating it yet.
Okay, that's fair enough.
All right.
So if I may, we have a process in Title 19 for making changes to Title 17. And I don't think we're going to have public hearing ability to get such a thing posted to give 10 days notice.
Oh,
We won't have
That's
a
right.
draft probably in time. I'm concerned about our turnaround time, for Friday for an agenda, and for we're less than 10 days from that next meeting.
yeah, we do have a time frame, guys, that we have to watch for. Let me go down the list. Thank you for bringing that up. Kim, your hand was up.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to wade through what Mr. DiGiulio is saying and what Councilmember Moore is saying. So the ordinance that Mr. DiGiulio would be writing would essentially be a suspension of C and D, not a rewrite, not a revocation to make them go away. Is that so we're basically going to say for 60 days we will not enforce C or D, or for 90 days, or whatever that time frame is. That's the ordinance that we're looking to create, correct? Or are we looking to change C and D? I'm sorry, I'm really confused.
Scott, come off mute.
I'm sorry, let me just clarify my motion. It's to repeal those two subsections of the code, Kim, until the comprehensive plan review is complete.
Okay.
So give planning commission and the city council a chance to review these 22-year-old, 22-year-old, or 23-year-old sections of the code, and stop enforcement by repealing them. This moratorium thing just sounds like more bureaucracy. I'm saying just stop until the code review is completed and then go forward again.
So then I guess then it would be, I want a legal interpretation. By repealing it, that would mean that somebody could build a fence wherever the heck they want to, regardless of assuming it's not a safety issue, regardless of easements or whatever. So this code basically goes away, and somebody could come through and put up a fence right on the road. Do I understand that to be, is that a true statement?
No, it's not. Well, not as I read it. Section A of that code says constructed fences shall not exceed 6 feet in height, measured original grade. So there's still a lot of regulation in here.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I could, front yard fences shall not be less than 2 feet away from the right of way. So I could put up a front yard fence right. within the 2 feet.
And I think, Kim, that was the question on the table that I think Bruce was asking also about. So if this, then what impact does it have, so that we can prepare some of those scenarios for you
Okay.
to understand? I think
Thank
that's
you.
the question you're asking.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
fair enough. Okay, Dean H.
Mute.
Oh, you're mute too.
I think this is a procedural question. I think there are some, to actually vote on something that would have an impact without having a public hearing first, I think it would have to be an emergency ordinance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so I'm going to turn back to Councilmember Moore and say, I think I understand and respect the desire to repeal this as is and to have that discussion. I think in order to actually do that, there aren't enough clock ticks between now and then. And so I think I'm speculating, it's always dangerous, that we could draft an emergency ordinance, because we could do that without a public hearing, or we draft an actual repeal and then that happens later. Mr. DiGiulio, is that, are there other options? Or are those two accurate?
Those are effectively the options, correct.
Okay, thank you. No,
And
I'll
then
defer to.
Right, and you did pick up on that in order to do that ordinances, you need to give enough time for public notice. So that's where you guys were making a notation that the timing would be not working out, I don't think, for the April 12th council. But anyways,
Right.
Is that what you're going to say, Dinar?
Well, I'm assuming that repealing a portion of Title 17 would qualify as making a change to Title 17, which would fall under the guidelines directed by Title 19 that helps us to make changes to our land use code, right? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah,
So,
except if it's done under the emergency authority provided by statute.
so Greenwood, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but it also requires Title 17 changes require going to the Planning Commission first.
Correct.
Okay, so again, to Councilmember Moore, I think if we want to vote on this sooner, it's an emergency resolution and has some temporary aspect. Or for an actual repeal, it happens not next week, and there's a whole lot of other procedure that happens ahead of it. And since this is his, I'm asking him what his preference is.
Scott?
That's directed to me.
Yeah.
I think this whole thing is absurd, frankly. You know, I think that we've spent massive amount of time, we've accomplished nothing. You know, this is a problem. It certainly was a problem for my family, and it's a problem for other people in this town. And I think we should do something about it. So, you know, we're once again back mired in bureaucracy and not able to do anything. It just seems silly. So I don't really care what it is, emergency ordinance. I mean, I think Attorney DiGiulio just told us he could write a resolution that we could vote on to temporarily repeal this law. So you know, if that requires a public hearing first, okay. You know, and if there's not appetite to do it, then let's just, you know, we can just move on. You know, I just think this is something that this council has talked about a lot in the context of this, and we keep running into this kind of like, well, you know, it's policy or it's a resolution, it's not binding, you know, okay, well, let's change the law. Oh, well, we can't change the law because of this, that, and anything. So I don't know. It's just, I'm frustrated, and it's 9 o'clock at night. So that's what
I respect that. It sounds like we're talking about an emergency resolution then.
I guess if that's what it is, then yeah, I mean, however we can do it, to do it quickly and decisively is what I want to try. And if people vote against it, then fine, it doesn't pass. This is more for me to test out whether the council is prepared to actually take action on something like this that I think has caused quite a bit of trouble in the community. And it does tie back to the enforcement. Certainly the enforcement has been a hell of a lot more aggressive recently than it ever was in my prior experience serving on this council, and I think that should change. And I think that we should not be enforcing these old laws that really make no sense in today's world, especially, and that our citizens don't even know about for the most part.
Okay, let me go to Dinar.
If I'm not mistaken here, we don't, I just want it to be clear, we don't have any complaints and have not had any complaints on this section of the code that are in that report. Or last year's
I think Pam Phillips would disagree with you.
Pam Phillips' case, as we've talked about before, was because she was making a nonconformity worse, which is, again, one of the elements that brings the, is not permitted. And so therefore those 6 additional, or I think it was 6 additional shrubs that was planted was asked to be removed because it was in the right of way. And she has a non-conforming hedge that was allowed to be there. And we cannot allow for a worsening of a nonconformity. And that was the reason, not anything to do with anything else here. It was that particular portion of our enforcement that is what Pam Phillips was required to follow.
Plus, it wasn't.
So
I need to get an I need to take a really good look and talk to staff about this section C. But the way I'm reading that only allows you to bring it up to the property, up to the line of the right of way. If that's the case, it made no difference in this case in any of the situations we're talking about.
So I think just to put this along, we're obviously going to have this on the next week's agenda. Staff now hears where you're coming from, the questions and the comments that people have, and we can be prepared and try to answer those questions, anticipate some of those scenarios so that you then can have good informed information. And depending on where Scott goes with legal help on emergency ordinance or not, we'll have to advise you on the timing, right, for anything. If it's not a requirement for public hearing, then you'll be okay on the timing. Otherwise, or we'll pick it up later. I guess we have 60 days to do that. So if that's the case, then I don't know, Dean H., if your hand is up still, or you just have a follow-up. No, you're okay?
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
Lower hand.
Okay. So are we clear? This is where we're going to go with this? All right. So I want to move on to the next agenda. You got, okay. Sorry, Steve Frieden.
You're muted.
Unmute.
You'll find it. Find the unmute.
I usually don't even, I try to skip the whole mute thing. Would you please run through this one more time just to me, so I'm clear on where we're going with this?
So I think what Scott is going to do is probably have a conversation with Steve DiGiulio and be prepared to come back on April the 12th, perhaps with emergency ordinance verbiage. Meanwhile, however that may come in, the city staff hearing where the questions and issues are related to this particular topic is going to look into that and be prepared to help answer some of the questions. What are we seeing? What have we worked with? What are the consequences? Just kind of the what if, so that when you guys go to vote on what we would guess would be an emergency ordinance, you can make an informed decision on if that's the right path to go or not.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm good.
All right. Okay. Now let me get back here to the agenda. move that off. We'll move that off. And so now we are, oh my goodness, guys, we're at the Council Rules and Procedures Committee, your discussion. Yeah. We had stormwater, but
Yeah,
were you guys wanting stormwater? We may want to do an amendment right here, considering it's 9 o'clock. If you wanted to move the stormwater over to the April 12th meeting, may I have a
Yes,
motion
please.
to amend the agenda to do that?
Yeah,
So
Steve,
moved.
so moved.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. And I know, Sean, you'll be prepared anyways to speak on it. So we'll move the stormwater discussion to the 12th. So that should leave us with Dean H. and Bruce's good facilitation work on the council rules and procedures. Where would you guys like to go next?
I defer to Councilmember Jones.
well, if I deferred to you, then nothing would happen, right? So this has been going on for a while. We've had some two documents in front of the council. I mean, our sincere desire and hope is that you have had an opportunity to review the draft rules and guidelines that we prepared and be able to respond in this meeting, in this study session, with things that you have questions about, observations you want to discuss. We felt that these items were fairly cut and dried, and that hopefully there wouldn't be a lot of in-depth discussion on this part, and that we would focus in the next study sessions and council sessions on the rest of the items that do, we think, have good discussion that's going to be needed on them. So I guess I would ask for the three council members that weren't part of our committee to respond, and if you've had a chance to look them over, your observations, things you want to discuss or change.
All right, who's willing to offer your thoughts? Thank you, Steve.
Well, to get us started here, thanks to you guys for your work on this. I appreciate, very appreciative. I'm on the areas, I think you're looking for an opinion on the areas that you've already provided, that you've drafted.
Correct.
I'm generally fine with that. I didn't see too much in there that concerned me. I do want to add a goal to the subcommittee goal that you wanted to deliver to us. And that was that I want us to be able to facilitate a wide and diverse exchange of comments and information. And to me, that that means maybe a less formal Robert Rules of Order type concept that brings in the opinions of the mayor, city administrator, and others as we see fit, to make sure that we really get all the information we need to make a good decision on the areas we have to decide on. And I don't want to cut off conversation from others who can help us do that. And so I like I certainly appreciate using Robert's Rules of Orders and having the rules there. But by the same token, at the same time, I like hearing from the other people because it helps me make a better decision and tells me something that in so many cases I just may not be as clear on it. So I'd like to, if that's something we can add into the guidelines in some facet, especially as we have meetings, that's the key, the goal I would like to make sure that gets in there. So
I'm going to let you keep going before I respond. Sorry.
that's it.
Yeah.
I'm done.
You're done?
Mhm.
Go ahead, Dean.
I was going to say, you are consistent. Right now, we have this, if you look on page 31 of your packet, I tried to reflect your language from previous feedback. The application of parliamentary rules should facilitate, not discourage, the exchange of comments and information. Part of that will fall down, as Mr. Giulio's noted, to how we execute. on all this. I will. You can provide feedback if there's different language you want there. I'll probably go back and look at the transcript of this meeting and see if there are things on, wide ranging. And you had other language, but I will. That's the sentence where this feedback comes out. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Just a quick point, Dean H. It could be worth just a question to Ann McFarland because she brought it up at the parliamentary training that she did at SCA on Monday, and she had like a simple sentence that could be put into guidelines, so it might be helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. Kim.
First, Dean and Bruce, great start. Thank you very much for tackling this. My first reaction is, oh my gosh, what a lot of work we've got in front of us to fill in the blanks. But I think that's okay. My only request might be as a council to maybe prioritize over the next couple of council study sessions how we want to approach this and how we want to tackle it. I mean, there is a lot to fill in, and that's okay. So maybe as we plod through this, we can kind of be thinking about the next topic, or the next 2 or 3 topics. I think that would be wonderful to kind of get our heads wrapped around how we're going to proceed forward. But again, thank you. This is a great body of work, and I am really encouraged to work on it and to move it forward.
Well, you have brought up exactly the next piece of our presentation, I guess you would say. The first was to see what your comfort was with the rules and guideline sections that we done that seemed to be fairly straightforward. And then the second document that you got identified all those other sections, and then we prioritized them. And thank you, Steve, for some input to help on that. Councilman Friedman, I guess I should clarify which Steve. And Dean, you were hopefully going to provide or you might have a listing of how we ordered those, or we could provide that at the next council meeting too. But we have a priority order for that, Kim, that does exactly what you're saying, that would hopefully, after you take a look at it, and we can work on them in order, our goal would be to try to do this over 3 sessions. 3, and if the council agreed, 3 study sessions versus council meeting sessions. And so one of our first questions is, do you have the interest and time to want to devote a study session in later April, May, and June to continue the process, or you want to break it up into smaller pieces and do it as part of normal council meetings, or what would be your appetite for this?
So I did so I looked at the discussion and I certainly do not want to do this in normal council meetings. I guess I'm wondering more about the process. I know that there's been a lot of work potentially looking at other councils and structures and so forth. And I'm wondering, I guess, kind of maybe thinking out loud, if breaking it up into 3 is not going to be enough time, only unless we're presented with maybe a reading list to say, hey, here's our thought process as we looked at Medina, we've looked at Euro, we've looked at some bigger cities, so forth and so on. and almost a recommended reading list, because you guys have delved into this thing, and rather than try to go out into the ether and just find this on our own, it would be interesting for us to maybe research some of the topics before we meet in a council session. And again, I can't yet comprehend how much reading, pre-read we need to do before we meet in a 2-hour block. I mean, I'm still trying to get my head around all of that.
Well, I
Just
think we're
thinking out
trying
loud.
to get our head around it too. But you're right on in the type of approach Dean and I had been talking about, that we would help provide reading, maybe several alternative approaches, but all of this would be provided ahead of the meeting, and that would require some homework to make the meeting productive. And we could try this for the first meeting and see how it goes. And if it doesn't work well, then we could revise it and do something different.
I'd be in favor of that. I think that'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Sure. And Kim, just for what it's worth, the way that we were thinking about this is if you go to bottom of page 30 in the packet, what we've done here for 3.1 parliamentary procedure is we took the best text we could find, we cobbled it together, we have an improvement here from Councilmember Friedman, and we consider this the draft text. This is what we're going to do for all the other parts. Essentially say, here's our offer of the best assembled bits of other cities' text. And for reference, here's where we took it from, so you can see the original. And for the most part, we're marking where we make edits. So you can, so we'll have bits like, this is what arbitrarily choosing cities here. This is what Kent, or this is what Maple Valley has. And, you know, we changed this, and we changed this, and we added this based on what this other city had. And so you'll be able to see, I think you'll be able to see that. And we'll, the feedback I'm taking to heart here is get it out with enough time, get it out in advance with enough time that you have a chance to actually go through it, and we can do that.
Yes, please.
Right.
Okay.
So just in summary, the council is accepting the base content and the draft that we put together, and then we are going to work in filling in the missing sections of this with the process we just described, and we'll do the first priority set of items the way that Dean just described for a study session that we could schedule at the, what would it be, the fourth Tuesday in April. And that we would provide that in advance with adequate time to allow you to look it over and bring comments and observations for discussion during the meeting and make it worthwhile, and see how it goes.
That sound good, guys?
That's fine.
All right, looks good. Kim, that's all right with you?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, and Scott, that sound okay for you? Lost Scott, maybe on mute. Scott, are you there? Did we lose you? All right, don't hear from Scott. Well, you got 4 of the other ones, so that sounds like a plan.
That's fine, man.
Oh, there you are. Okay, thank you. What else then, Bruce or Dean H, that you're needing here? You okay?
I think we got our marching orders.
All right.
Yep,
Got
we're good.
marching.
Thank you.
All right. If I've done my job right in the squirrely, we have the 2 items pushed off for next week, and I think we have the game plan. Am I missing anything on agendas that? See, not, no one's screaming. So I guess at this point, good work, everybody. Can only imagine that if we try to put this stuff into our normal council meeting, we would be there till midnight. So Thank you for that energy and effort. Anything else? None seen. So may I ask for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
There you go. Got a second?
Second.
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 Stick with me. We're almost there. Any further discussion to adjourn at 9:20 at night? Hearing none, all those in favor
Yeah.
say aye.
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 And
Anyway.
thank you for not going 3 hours tonight, guys. I've been up since 5 this morning, so if I'm a little slow, it's because I've been up since 5 this morning, so I apologize.
All right. Thank you for your dedication and
Thank you.
service. Appreciate that, everybody. Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.